Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our meeting this evening. This is our first webinar, so hopefully it works out okay. I'm sure it will. We have a lot of people here, and we have a great speaker. Wild Ones Pontchartrain Basin is dedicated to providing the best information that we possibly can to meet the Wild One mission to promote native landscapes through education, advocacy, and collaborative action. Our vision is to see native plants and natural landscapes thriving in every community. Please help us by encouraging your family and your friends to join, and by asking at your local nurseries to carry local ecotype plants. My name is Patty Zebrick, by the way. I'm the president of Wild Ones Pontchartrain Basin chapter. This meeting is in a webinar style. Please mute yourself and turn off your videos. Questions at the bottom of your screen in the toolbar. There is a question and answer section. Please submit your questions to Marc Pastorek. We have someone who is going to go over the questions at the end. If we don't get to your question, Marc is going to provide his email address, and you can ask him questions there. So let's get started here. Marc Pastorek is with us. He is the co-owner of Pastorek Habitats, LLC. It's a Louisiana corporation that specializes in design and seed production for prairie landscapes. Marc began establishing his prairie seed farm in 1998. It was the first of its kind in Mississippi. That project is described in the book Southeastern Grasslands, Biodiversity, Ecology, and Management. Marc is the past president of the Cajun Prairie Society and both the Louisiana Native Plant Society and the Mississippi Native Plant Society. Okay, everybody, I think we're going to start here. We're going to get Marc on. I'm going to mute myself. Marc, are you ready? Can you hear me, Marc?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. All right, can I turn the meeting over to you?
Yes, I'll try to take over. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. And sorry about the snafu, everyone, but it's definitely going to be worth the wait. Okay, I'm muting.
All right, are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay, and I will then.
No, just you can push that, but if you want to unmute yourself, everybody's talking and just have a conversation. That way you don't have to try to drag it inside.
Okay, yeah, and we're on. Okay, I apologize to everyone for that. Turn my phone off. And I'll first say I very much appreciate the opportunity to share tonight. I apologize for the wait. And tonight I am going to talk about landscaping with prairie plants and savanna plants, and plant communities, and you know, the idea of using plants as using seed to produce landscapes that are biologically, worthy of interest and use as a tool to build more models, to be able to produce these models in a way that's large at scale. And so so I have these two questions that I'm working with tonight. One is, how can I create a landscape scale garden that is biologically diverse and relatively self-sustaining? And so by landscape scale, I mean, larger than an acre, and in large scale, hundreds of acres and potentially thousands. The other question is, how can I do this economically and on my own? And so when I do my work, I'm using harvesting seed from high quality prairies and savannas. And I'm doing this in order to produce landscapes that you can otherwise not produce. You have a place where you are, if it's in a parish or a county, you can utilize the information that's out there to actually build an authentic landscape that is right centered on your property. So all the plants that are in that landscape are, local genetic, local representatives of your immediate area. So I call that a genetic facsimile, which is just taking all of the gene pool from all the various species that are in Cajun prairie or inland prairies, savannas, etc., and gathering that seed and putting it out there into a new landscape. And in doing so, you're mimicking prairie, number one, but you're creating a facsimile of a native prairie that is not been plowed, not been disturbed to any great extent. So when we're talking about doing this work, there are these two elements, savanna and prairie. Of course, there are great differences between the two. You have prairies that show up in prairie soil, and you have savannas that may contain some of the same plants that the prairie the prairie soils produce or support, but the soils in the savanna are going to be much different. There's going to be acidic in savanna and generally alkaline in prairie. They're going to be fire tolerant trees in a savanna, so generally 1 to 3 or so genus of trees. And there are few trees or no trees in a prairie. In a pine savanna, you're obviously represented by pine as the dominant plant. And typically when you lose the pines, you gain prairie, and in that you start seeing cedar. So if you transition from pine to prairie, you'll see a pretty stark difference. You also have in common plants that one type of prairie or one type of savanna might have that is shared by many types of those plant communities. But you also have distinguishing plants, plants that you would not find in a prairie that are in savanna, or plants that are not in savanna pine lands, but are in prairie. So there's some pretty distinguishing characters, but in general, they all of the prairies and savannas in the southeast, the coastal plain, share a great deal of plants. And the further you go from one spot east or west or north, the fewer plants are going to be found that are in common with where you came from, whence you came. Also, we should talk about pyrogenic plants and how they create the openness of the savanna, whereas in a prairie, very often it's an edaphic soil condition where you have clay soils typically, or soils that are highly restricted, where certain plants do not grow, but certain plants only grow. And you have, so you have these two conditions that that, let's say, when you transition, when you're walking from, across prairie into savanna, it's almost indistinguishable. But then you start realizing that things are becoming a little bit different by the way that certain plants show up in the landscape. So to kind of get an idea of how Louisiana relates to the Southeast in general with regard to major prairie systems, the Cajun Prairie is one of 6 or 7, is it, major prairie systems in the Southeast. And notable in our discussion tonight is the Black Belt, which is this band of prairie that runs from Tupelo, Mississippi to Selma, Alabama. And then you've got the Jackson Prairie soils that have distinctive prairie on them that runs across from the as you see on the map. And then so you have the Cajun Prairie, but more importantly are these little dots in Louisiana, and they actually go down towards Baton Rouge, but I'll show you a little bit later the actual map of the prairies of Louisiana. And so those were the prairies, and fitting in like a puzzle into the savanna landscape that runs from Texas to Virginia, the Appalachians all the way to the Florida Keys. That's basically the coastal plain pine forest and pine savanna landscapes. And you have, a variety of different regional dominant plants that are characteristic in so much that the longleaf pine region in Louisiana and South Mississippi, Alabama is actually called the longleaf pine blue stem range, because the blue stem grasses are so prevalent in the understory vegetation. And sorry, here we are. And then, so specifically, again, we should talk about blackland prairies, because Louisiana has blackland prairies. These are prairies that are located in Texas all the way to Georgia, and it includes the Black Belt and the Mississippi Jackson prairies. These are very different than the Cajun Prairie. And to give you an idea of how these Black Belt or how these blackland prairies exist. They exist more in island form where there are just openings in the landscape. And so you have forested prairie forests right around these open areas where the prairies are, and that blends eventually into the pine forests. And then finally, this map is Louisiana. Of course, in the bottom left is Cajun Prairie, which pretty incredible size, while the inland prairies, the different types, Saline, Morse, Kiefer, Copenhagen, Anacoco, those prairies are all in the northern part of the state. And again, you could also call them island prairies, because say from the air, you have, I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but this is the Cajun Prairie out of Malcolm Vidrine's book. And what you see basically is in the white area in the center is an 80-mile by 80-mile large area of prairie called the Great Southwest Prairies. And these were separated by rivers, and but they in fact they were very large prairies that had no separations, no major separations for miles and miles. And then going back to the blackland prairies in Louisiana, this is a Kiefer Prairie photograph from the 1930s, showing the pine forest surrounding the open areas of the prairie. And you see multiple different prairies that make up one chain of prairies. To do this work, I was able to, over the years, find these study sites. Number one, I started studying these landscapes before I was interested in actually creating them, and was involved with the Crosby Arboretum in Mississippi for 25 years, and some of their holdings, their land holdings, are amazing collections of different habitats and really wonderful representations of them. So I did that for many years, and of course, and then I met Charles Allen, Malcolm Vidrine one day at a conference, and then things began to happen as far as developing ideas of doing these landscapes. When you find these landscapes, they're basically unplowed pieces of ground that have never been disturbed to the point where the plants have been eliminated. And those are called remnants, and they are literally remnants of the ancient prairie. And you also then have restored prairies, which are not really comparable to a remnant in general terms. I've seen some incredible remnants that restored prairies can't quite match. In remnant prairies, you may have as much as 40 species per square meter. And in restored prairies, it may be somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 or so per square meter. And that is if you do a lot of work. So I was inspired by the vegetation and the plant communities and all of that. But I also was inspired by people. And I'll be talking about 4 people tonight: Charles Allen, Malcolm Vidrine, Bruno Borsari, and Gail Barton. And these landscapes behind these 2 guys, Charles on the left, Malcolm on the right, are inspiring in themselves. Charles is in the Eunice Prairie there, and Malcolm is at Pure Air Seed when we went to one of the North American Prairie Conferences, and that's Echinacea pallida growing, and it's, I remember the fellow telling us that he hauled away 18 wheelers of seed from his fields, which was pretty impressive though. And so one of the things that you'll see in these slides tonight, two things. One is that all of these landscapes, generally you'll find grasses in these landscapes, very important. And then the other thing, all of the gardens that you'll see, most of the landscapes that you'll see in these photographs are all fire generated or fire managed. Gail Barton is a friend, a longtime friend, and she and I spent many years doing work in the Black Belt area. She is from there, and we were lucky enough to do a project together. I might tell you about that a little bit later. Also, Bruno Bersari, he's a biologist, and he has been involved with Cajun Prairie and other prairies in the north as well. I'm having trouble. There we are. So some old pictures of some of the prairies that Malcolm and Dr. Allen found are pretty incredible. And when I, mentioned ancient landscapes, one picture I think is pretty demonstrable is this big blue stem stand that Charles Allen is in, and now he's 6 feet and tall, and you can see the blue stem above him, so maybe 8 feet, 9 feet, and I've seen it maybe even taller than that on some wet years. But the thing is, blue stem grows in a clone, and it grows in a circular fashion. Charles told me one time he was in a patch of big blue stem that was at least 30 feet in diameter, and this looks like a representation of that. Thing is, we have plants of big blue stem that we've planted in our gardens 25, 30 years almost, and those plants are 3-4 feet in diameter. And this right here is pretty incredible if you think about the age of this plant, single plant. Sorry. And so what we will be talking about today is small scale species diversity. And this is a pretty good representation of that, where you see many species growing right tight together, everyone reaching for light, moisture, and space, and root space as well. And so to understand small scale species diversity, that is basically herbaceous plants that have different morphologies, different shapes and sizes, and they create this really diverse landscape, or they are this really diverse landscape. And in North America, the coastal plain of the U.S., where we are here in Louisiana, is one of the most diverse ecosystems is the most diverse ecosystem in North America, the coastal plain of the Gulf and the Atlantic. So Charles Allen, Malcolm Vadrine found these remnant prairies. They wrote papers on these prairies. They established the Cajun Prairie Society. The society gets together and does or used to do plantings, transplantings, and more properly said, plant rescues. And we would rescue plants from these high quality prairies and put them into the property that Charles and Malcolm arranged with the city of Eunice back in the late 1980s. And that then became the Eunice Prairie. And then we have these biannual meetings, business meetings. It's a 501c3, and we tour these certain prairies. And I would say without a lot of these folks, you know, I would know a little less than what I know today. There's a bunch of really hardworking, good people who have gone through that through the years, through the Cajun Prairie Society. And then more current pictures of our native prairie in some of the most extreme southwest parts of Louisiana. This is Cameron Parish, and this is an old, a very large ranch, and obviously, you know, a really wonderful stand of Rudbeckia nitida, Texas coneflower. I call it Cajun coneflower. I think that's a better name, and we have a lot of it, so we can claim that. And in the background, you see two people. That's Chris Reed and Larry Allen, and it gives you a perspective. You can see hundreds of feet past them, how far that stand goes. And then you're seeing grasses, very important. The idea that grasses are the bones for the prairie landscape. And then prairies have really massive root systems. They are very competitive root systems, so they're intertwined, and they're deep, and they're wide, and they're able to sustain the plants in some of the worst conditions. And we have some extremes in Louisiana, you know, weeks of rain on and off, and sometimes days of straight rain, and then extreme drought like we had last year, which is extraordinary and unheard of. And still, prairie did just fine. I established a prairie, you know, from seed last year, and it is doing quite well. Thank you. So we also have these really tenacious roots. On the left is a Rudbeckia subtomentosa. On the right is Liatris pycnostac, and that's my hand. And so you can see the scale of those roots and the density. Really, you know, meaty, big and tough plant roots. And so, and then you have tenacity in these in the ability of seed to grow. These plants right here, Rudbeckia grandiflora, is planted planted a prairie on top of 6 inches of crushed asphalt, and it's doing just fine. Thank you very much. Also, the black belt prairie has some outcrops that are exposed chalk and limestone, etc. And you can see these prairie plants have found their way to go through the chalk. And generally, this isn't through cracks. This is just the age of the plant finally reaching past the surface of the soil and getting hold of getting a foothold so that it can take, so that it can grow. You can see on my right foot there is Liatris aspera. And then you have aerodynamics. These plants fly. You've got seed that is airborne and will show up in the strangest places. This is a crack in the wall at the Walgreens in Covington, Louisiana, at the parking lot. Evergreen goldenrod in a gutter in a boudin shop in Eunice. And you see a tomb in Lafayette Cemetery with bushy blue stem growing on it. So these things move around, and the reason is because of their seed. A lot of the plants in the prairie, most of the plants in the prairie are grasses and asters, and both are equipped with really amazing skills at flying. And So that's maybe why they're so prevalent in the prairie. They get around where other seed is either gravity dispersed or brought around by animals, etc., or insects even. So you also have the idyllic, which is this amazing, beautiful landscape when you create a prairie from seed. And this is one in Folsom. You can't have a prairie unless seed arrives on the site, and so these plants move around, and then there is this other thing. And in our part of the country, we have the most frequent lightning strikes, and therefore we've had historically the most frequent fires that have been part of the landscape evolving over tens of thousands of years. Some of these like plant communities, like the pine community, has gone from oak dominance to pine dominance over the last 100,000 years, and the fire being the instrument that has created the diversity. And by that, a bit of information with regard to fire in the landscape. It's true that when fire comes through, you have what is called a heterogeneous fire. It's not just one line of fire, the same temperature all across. It is different. Plants have different ability for combustibility, and some are burn hotter than others. And in the grasses, those, of course, are the hottest burning ones. Those are the plants that very often the heat is so intense that the plant may actually die, and then you have this open space where new seed has chance to germinate and grow while this temporary opening is available. One paper is really interesting to read is why prairies are like prairies in Florida as compared to savanna. And one of the concepts is that trees shade grasses, and grasses need sun, and trees can eliminate grasses under their canopy, whereas grasses can eliminate trees. If grasses are substantial enough, if you have sprouting trees, very often you can damage or kill that tree with fire. And so it's a battle between light and no light. And so generally fire wins that battle. I was involved with this paper, significance of micro prairie reconstruction in urban environments. And basically the idea behind this paper was to build a prairie model in the urban area where people can be reintroduced to what a prairie is, because it's not something you see. And most people for 25 years have said, oh, we have prairie in Louisiana. I didn't realize that. Well, yes, we had a lot of prairie in Louisiana. So the idea is to bring these landscapes into the people where they can see them. And particularly one of the things I was working on for the last several years is getting them into city parks. And we've done some of that. So as far as the prairies are concerned, we've got all these grasses. I won't go into this. You can get these names of these grasses from the recording later. I would like to talk about asters and grasses being part of the major four family members that are represented most in all prairies and generally in most prairies and most savannas. And you've got all these different types of prairies and savannas represented here. And of the multiple families that are represented in any one given prairie, consistently you'll see asters and grasses being the first two that are the most common in all of these different prairies, from Carolina, Virginia to Georgia and beyond. And this is true all the way through, you know, the Kwanzaa Prairie in Kansas, and further north you go, you still have these plants that are in common, but you have these plants that distinguish that you've gotten to a northern zone. Excuse me. One last thing on phenology, being the length of blooming from the spring until the fall, where you have all of these plants that will bloom in sequence as the growing season goes, and you might have 10 or 15 in 1 month or 25 in another month blooming in one given area. And so that changes from month to month and throughout the growing season. Again, butterflies and bees are they're very closely associated with the grasses, especially the grasses being the most common plant that butterfly caterpillars are found on. And then you have these really unique insects that are very much closer related to certain plants. An example of that is this skulled wasp that you generally wouldn't see without prairie plants being in front of you. These are, to me, very unusual to find them, and when you're in a prairie, maybe not so unusual. These few slides were taken at my place in Mississippi, this is one of the most interesting insects that I found in my place in Mississippi. This is a blue-green metallic sweat bee, and I just caught it where I could get a little glimpse of it, a little blurry, but nonetheless. So these remnants are here and there, and it's an interesting thing. You can step off of the street in the 21st century and step into one of these prairies and go back into the 15th century or further. It's a kind of like a space travel, a time travel thing. And then so we're at the point where I can talk a little bit about how to do these landscapes. And basically it's very simple method of creating landscapes. You spend a lot of time collecting seed, and you have to find the places to collect seed, and of course, you know, you've got some really good places in Louisiana. One of the, you know, a good place to start is the Cajun Prairie site in Eunice. This is Highway 17 in Sumter County, Alabama, and this is a huge stand of Gaillardia astravelis, and this is work that we were doing in a project in Alabama. And then the harvester that I had in my hand is a handheld harvester out of Canada that was through Charles Allen, and this is the basket, that the collection basket that the stems and seeds, etc., go into, and then you can then use machinery to harvest. This is a flail vac, and again, again, this is in Alabama. So you harvest the seed by hand, by machine, and then you dry it, and it's basic drying in the sun and on tarps, and you basically have to have available sunlight, and you have to stir the seed and get it to the point when you reach down at the tarp, near the tarp itself, and you grab the stuff on the bottom, which is going to be the most likely to be still moist. When you grab that, if it almost crunches, then you know that seed is dry, and it has to be dry, or else it will go bad. It'll mold or mildew, whatever. And I'm not, maybe rarely had that happen a couple of times, but generally you can get it pretty dry and you can store it. This is a mixing day. We had Matt Heron helping me mix and turn seed. This is maybe 300-400 pounds of seed. And then we generally would keep our seed in plastic bags that are in these cardboard barrels that stack pretty well and work fine for that. So to determine whether or not a plant is appropriate for your landscape, if you get close, that's good. But if you can get closer, it's even better. By that I mean, if you're looking at your county, your parish, as the location you want to definitively say that this is going to be a purist garden. This is where this is what I do when I'm doing large landscapes, mitigation bank, for instance, where you don't want to have anything that's not been determined to be in that parish, and spend a lot of time doing that. And I think these two books are really helpful. This is one that Charles Allen worked with when we were doing our work in 2020. This is one that I work with regularly, one of three, volume of three, where you have distribution of these plants that are in our landscapes, where they occur in the parishes, in the counties. And you can see that some of these plants have wide distribution, like this prairie clover here goes all the way from the coast all the way through into Canada and way into the west. And then you have some more restricted distribution of what is more or less Midwestern plants, but you see these disjunct areas where you find these plants. Notice the black belt right here. Some really interesting plants that you don't see in Louisiana that you find in the black belt, but they're still in the same general blackland prairie type. And then you have even more restricted, like this is slender blue stem distribution, which is obviously coastal. And then you can see that it's very much a plant of the coast, and it is one of the distinguishing plants between our tall grass prairie and the Midwestern tall grass prairies. There are some problematic plants, and there are some really bad problematic plants. But there are a lot of plants that are kind of problematic that aren't to be worried with. But these are some: Kogon grass, Johnson grass, King's Ranch blue stem, Botryocloa bladii, torpedo grass, and chloris grass. So more on that one day. So to do these projects, I do something to the soil to eliminate the vegetation that exists. Depends on how bad the the problem is, and that generally depends on how close you are to an urban area. If you're out in the country, you might be able to just recapture your landscape by starting to burn it. But generally, if I'm doing a seed project, I'll either till it, plow it, whatever, cultivate the soil, and repeatedly if I can do that, or I'll use an herbicide. So I'm not one who's a big proponent of herbicides, but I use them only because there sometimes is a necessity to do so. There are people who argue that, and I understand, but then they can do their landscapes themselves. And after about 20 of these, you'll decide maybe we should try some alternative approaches. So till, plow, herbicide, whatever it takes to reduce the competition on the ground, because you have perennial plants that take a long time to generally show up in the landscape. And then finally, you need to have good soil seed contact. And that's what I mean by plowing, or when you herbicide, for instance, multiple times, or 5 times, 3 times in a growing season, you basically have a bare ground. And you distribute your seed and press that seed in the ground if you possibly can. But I've done it without pressing the seed. Just distribute the seed and walk away, and you've got a prairie, I guarantee. I've even seen it where the hillside had been plowed by the client. I brought the seed and thought the whole hillside would go away, and it was amazing prairie. So this stuff is really able to survive a lot of adverse conditions. Seed viability in this type of landscape, you might, in one study, 73 species, an average of 59% viability. So, about half of the seed is viable in general. But then you have these really low rates of germination by some species and really high germination rates by others. I would almost bet you that little blue stem has 98% germination rate, something close to it. Lattimore Smith taught me this. He said, why don't you use a blower to blow your seeds? And so that's what I've been doing for many years now. Backpack blower. And you can do that by hand. You can do an acre in about, 30 minutes, something like that, at an hour if you're really slow. And then you can do, I think this rig right here was one that did 400 acres in Mamou. I think it took them 2 days, and they did that by GPS. And that's a pretty good looking prairie from what I understand. First year growing season. So the first year you have, weather, drought, whatnot, maybe be a little concerned with, but competitive vegetation is the main thing. You'll see different things show up in different micro elevations. A matter of just an inch or two can change the landscape. Soil consistency depends on what, forget about that. Let's go on to weed competition. Weed competition is the most important objective, to reduce that as much as possible. And typically, if you can do that, you'll generally have mostly annual weeds show up the first year. And those generally are winter weeds, which are gone by, say, June. And then the first year, what I call foothold species, these are species that show up and actually bloom the first year, which there are numbered about 15 or maybe more if you're sowing 100 species. Boltonia monarda, Monarda punctata, fistulosa, and Euthamia, eupatorium, et cetera, et cetera. You can check these out on the video later, maybe. Second year establishment, you start to see much more flowering plants, much more grasses, density. You see then more species showing up that didn't show up the first year. The 5th year of establishment is definitely much different than the 3rd year. And then the 5th year is nothing compared to the 10th, and so forth and so on. Year 20 is pretty amazing, I must say. And this it's 25 years with my prairie in Mississippi. So then we can look at a few prairies and, you know, take a look at what kind of changes they've gone through. But this is the Eunice prairie. And back in the day, what we did was we planted along these roads, rescue plants. Initially, the plantings were done by seed and by plants rescued. And then for many years, we would come in and do plantings along this way. All of that moved to the west as time went on. And as time went on, half of this was tallow trees, or some great portion of it, maybe a third of it at least, was all tallow. And so year by year, we eventually got rid of most of the tallows. And when we did, that continued to move along. And of course, today it's all completely sown with self-generated seed. But you'll notice that on this end of the prairie and this side of the prairie, it's going to be maybe the more diverse. It's a little bit more upland. It's a little bit more able to, you know, to support these plants, because many of the ones that were chosen in here were chosen for their you know, high conservancy value, and in time the Eunice prairie has changed a little bit in that it's become more of a wetland prairie in many of the areas. Back in the day when Eunice was when I would say back in the mid late 90s, early 2000s, there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of baptisias that were brought from different locations. Both the white baptisia, the sphaerocarpa, and the nuttall, they were all put into the Eunice prairie. And then over time, these hybridized, and there were multiple different types of hybrids, and still may be many of them. But really unique things happened over the years. About 2018, in this area right here, out of the blue, was an explosion of Physothesia virginiana, I believe it is. I mean, just huge area where it had never been that much. And then, you know, last year there was very little. So it changes year to year. These are volunteers, maybe early on before I came along. This looks like, you know, mid 90s or early 90s, maybe earlier than that, but you can see the hair. And here is some of the, you know, baptisia in April. So if you look off to the left here, that looks like nuttall as compared to sphaerocarpa. And again, you see lots of grasses. You see Tradescantia right here. This is a composite, a yellow composite there. A lot of different plants competing. This is an aerial of the Liatris in bloom in September, I believe it is, and some more shots of Eunice. That Eunice was the second prairie restoration. The first is at the University LSU Eunice, and that one's still in existence today. This is the third that I know of. Maybe it's a little more down the line. Maybe there's some home prairies that were before it, but basically this is Durald Prairie. This is looking from the north to the southeast. And this area here is where we generally would work and put our rescue plants in here as well. And then this is kind of what Durald looks like. It looks like a prairie, basically, with a lot of really interesting plants. Then back in 2011, Dr. Allen and myself developed this idea. He brought up the idea. I helped him with the design, And then I helped him with the seed. We gathered 80 different species, I think it was, of seed, and we sowed that on 2 acres in 10 by 12 foot patches. And in between all the patches, we had mowed areas where we could then have our field trips and walk through and see all the different singular plantings. And then over time, that has grown into what is generally looks like a prairie. And it's not used like it was in the past, but you can still go to those sites and see some of those plants for sure. And so this is what it looks like. We marked it. Dr. Allen marked it with these poles so we knew where to make the pass. Dr. Vedrine's garden is a really fantastic garden. He developed it by digging low areas and building up trails with that soil, so he could get different types of vegetation to grow. And you can see here hibiscus, several other things with grasses and the hibiscus in bloom. And then in the summertime, a lot going on. And I show you these because, say, for instance, Dr. Vedrine didn't spray, he didn't till. He had a field that he just started plugging and seeding and burning. And that turned into that landscape. Dr. Allen did something a little different even. And what he did was just started burning. He's right next to the National Forest. And that created a beautiful garden. And that's where he does his workshops. This is in the summer, maybe the fall, I'm sorry. And Dr. Allen on the right, we're doing a burn for him one day. City of Mandeville did a design for a landscape to create a prairie for for conservation purposes, for identity of Mandeville, let's say. And this is the prairie that was created. It's quite large. It's a burned prairie. It's right there on the roadside, and it's quite visible. And there are complaints, but there are also people who just love this garden. So there are some things that you can do in the urban context and do them with the right frame of mind as far as fire is concerned. So over time, that garden has become, pretty substantial. There's some things that are now popping up that weren't there some years ago, and more of some of the things that were there before. So we manage them, and they keep on producing for us. There's another garden in Folsom that was about 2012. This basically, the client took a tractor and a disc and just disked up the area. We laid it out with paths and so forth, and that became a really wonderful garden. It has some real wonderful vignettes in the summer, and in the fall there are some real kind of doldrum kind of periods of time where it's not as, let's say, floriferous, colorful as it is in some times of the year, but you can see the density of plant material, and this is pretty much super successful as far as I'm concerned. When you see something like this, it's just amazing, and the insects that are brought in by the vegetation. And with sunflowers and asters in the fall, looks pretty interesting. Grasses, etc. So we're talking about distribution and being able to determine what is in your parish. By the way, Dr. Allen has has a list of all the parishes and all of the plants that are in each parish. It's a spread, it's a file of some sort, and that kind of makes it easy. You can probably get that from him. But this is a project in Alabama where we were given the whole growing season to collect seed plants, rescue plants from private property or roadsides, or but we were just in Sumter County, Alabama. This was a contract to do given to us by the University of Western Alabama. This is Gail Barton and I doing this work, and that is a restored prairie in a university campus that actually has other prairies that they have been burning for many years that are, let's say remnants of the remnants. When they were disturbed, they became fields, and then those are still being burned as the Campbell House garden is. And Campbell House in the back, that's seeding day. We basically just put the seed out and covered a little hay, wheat hay. And the garden is quite wonderful. I've never seen more big blue stem grass in one place than in Sumter County, Alabama. My garden in Mississippi is 10 acres, and it is this year somewhere 25, 26 years in the making. And so I spent 10,000 hours here and learned this property pretty well, and the plants in it, and have seen them develop and evolve over time, and quite an amazing experience it's been. One of the things that I did on the property, I seeded all these areas that you see marked off, all in green. Those were 2 years of seeding, using little handfuls, little tiny bags of seed. And that, is today, really interesting vegetation. Now, in this area, I did no seeding. All I did was burn this over the last 25 years. And you can see what incredible vegetation came from that. This was a Bahia grass field, so it was a pasture for cows for 25 years. And then it was tung oil orchard for 20 or 40 years. And then it was cotton. And so even then, all I did was burn this. And it had, enough fuel to burn first year, second year, third year, whatever. It got a little hotter and hotter, and really pretty vegetation. I had someone do an inventory of that many years ago, and pretty incredible stuff. This is a winter landscape at the farm. This is a summer landscape at the farm with, again, grasses. However, the grasses are along with this Pycnanthemum tenuifolium. And on the property, one of the most interesting and valuable plants to me is a close relative of this. This is Gaillardia astravalus, common in high quality prairie. And this is Gaillardia astravalus flavivirens, which is a yellow disked Gaillardia that you'll find in Vernon Parish and some of the western parishes. And then if you go even further west to the extreme edge of the distribution of Gaillardia astravalus, you'll find the Winkler's fire wheel, or Gaillardia astravalus winkleri, and the color forms. This is a plant that was given to me, a couple plants were given to me from Peter Luce in Texas, from the Piney Woods Center in Nacogdoches. And over the years, this is maybe, 7 different colorations. I have multiple photographs over the years of all different kinds of colors and forms. You can see the different forms of the leaves the petals, I'm sorry, and the colors of the rays change. Interesting stuff. In 2020, we did 2 major projects, over 600 acres of prairie. This is a 400-acre restoration in Mamu. And this is seeding day when we showed up to bring the seed. That's Gail Vadrine and the planting crew right there. And then this is, I think a week or 2 ago when Malcolm Vadrine was there and he took these photographs, or this photograph of the prairie. There's some good things going on there. And one more is residents in Franklinton, Louisiana. This is on its 4th year, and this is a really incredible garden. I used to think that I had the largest stand of Monarda that I had ever seen, but then this one came along, and this is quite a piece of work. It's just full of prairie plants as far as you can see. Out in this bottom area is a bog. We've done some restoration in there as well. And pretty interesting, wonderful plants. So, pardon my slow to the gun getting on board there. But I hope that I've been able to share some things that are going to be of value. I would recommend to anyone to experiment with seed. And if you have any questions at all, I'd be happy to answer those questions. You can contact me at the email shown on the screen, and I'll guide you as best as I can. So thank you very much, and I appreciate your attention. Good night. Oh, I think we have questions. Yeah.
Hey, Mark, it's Patty. It looks like the questions are coming in through the chat.
Okay.
So let's see if Danielle can ask them through the chat.
Looks like the first one we got was, how is the Mandeville planting maintained? Who does it, and what was the seeding rate?
Well, so the seeding rate, I will say, is unknown. I would venture to guess that I would have to look at the books, but it was probably maybe 15 pounds per acre of bulk seed, unclean seed. And then the management of the property is done by, I think it's done by a contractor who burns it. And then the city doesn't do much. I think it's burned and maybe it's mowed. Maybe it's not mowed these days. I think that I used to mow it after I burned it, but that's kind of the extent of the work that's done there. As far as I know, I don't recall ever seeing any trees pop up in that landscape. There's just not a lot of trees around except for the ones that were planted in the landscape. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. The next question, what are good strategies to fight early weeds in a new seeded meadow on a large scale?
Well, so the strategy is definite, and the strategy is to eliminate as much weeds as you possibly can before you seed, however you might do that. And you could experiment with that, or you can talk to somebody who knows. There are a lot of people who know, so you can ask around, and I'll be happy to guide you with that. But and so you'll have to repeat the question again. I'm sorry, I've forgotten the question.
That's okay. They're asking about strategies to fight early weeds.
Oh, strategies to fight. So thank you. So yes, I was working up to something. I'm getting old. So the strategy is to eliminate as much possible what happens is if you do that, then you have a lot of weeds the first year. And those are, again, going to be mostly annual weeds, unless for some reason you had a perennial in the mix that was not seen and was not addressed. But by tilling multiple times, you can eliminate a lot of these plants, or at least reduce them, or at least set them back so they're not as aggressive. And when you do your seed and when the new season comes. And so that is really the strategy. And you know, I'm one who says don't do anything to the landscape. Do nothing rather than to do something when you're doing management. I would pull no weeds. I would not pull weeds because what that does, in my opinion, when you pull the weed, you open up the soil for new weed seeds to germinate and grow. You've disturbed the soil. And what these weed seeds like is disturbance. And the reason why the annuals come, for instance, is because you've disturbed the soil. You've turned the soil. You've created this disturbance that they love and they respond to. And you get this cover of vegetation that's annual. And so that annual vegetation is generally gone by June. And so if you have weedy vegetation, let's say it's perennial, it's Brazilian verbena, or it's vasi grass, or it's Eupatorium, the Yankee weed, they call it. Those are plants that go away with fire. Now, if you're not using fire, then I will advise you should do much more preparation than you would if you're using fire. Dr. Allen's famous words were always, just put the seed out there and it'll grow. But the caveat to that is you have to burn for that to be an applicable approach. And that's what I did at my farm. I just tilled it, threw the seed out, started burning. It worked. So if you're not going to burn, and there are a lot of prairie, installation construction companies that do not burn. I would say most of the Midwestern companies do 90% of their landscapes and don't burn, burn 10%. Where I used to burn 90% of my landscapes and not burn 10%. But the point is that your preparation will have to be extreme, and especially if you have perennials, perennial weeds. I would advise, and especially some of these bad ones, you really should consider not even doing the project if you're not going to use herbicide, because you'll have that weed and it will, more or less take over your landscape. Those several weeds that I listed, those are ones that you should think twice about planting if you have that weed on your property, or you should think about thoroughly killing that weed before you do any consideration of planting. Hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, thank you. The next question we got, a small patch of Kogan grass showed up in my yard. It's a ½ acre. What's the best way to get rid of it?
Well, there's a lot of people not going to like this, but I learned something about that because I had a patch of Kogan grass about 3 feet in diameter or whatever when I bought my property 20 some odd years ago. And it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And of course, I tried everything and talked to everybody, did everything I could, and I did not kill it. And the only way you're going to kill Kogan grass is you're going to use a soil sterilant that just takes the life out of the soil. And I don't know. My advice is maybe with a small area like that, the other option is to till it and to till it and to keep tilling it and keep tilling it until it finally gives up. So you would till that patch but you would also come out the edge maybe 3 or 4 feet or more and till that as well. And let it dry up, let it rain and let it dry up. And then as soon as it's dry again, till it again. And as soon as it's dry again, till it again. You may have to do that a whole growing, well, you will have to do that a whole growing season. And then you would find out in the spring, the following year, whether or not you killed it or not. And then you may have to do it for another growing season. But that's a way to kill Kogon. But when you start talking about, 20 acres of Kogon, then what do you do? I've had to look at that before and just tell the client that there's nothing I can do. I wasn't prepared to be able to do anything with that. But anyway, I hope that helps. Good luck.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What was the red flower in the summer in Dr. Vidrine's garden? I think it was on one of the slides you showed.
That may be the most rare plant in Louisiana. That is the red milkweed, and I can't say the species name right now, just because I can't use the plant because I don't have the plant to use. Now, Dr. Vidrine has the plant. He's worked with that seed. He's rescued that plant, or maybe others, I'm not sure how many he did, from one of the Eunice prairies or from the roadside. Not in a real remnant, but a kind of a disturbed remnant. But as far as I know, that's the only, I don't know of anywhere I've ever seen red milkweed in Louisiana other than that plant, those plants in Dr. Vidrine's garden. Now, maybe Dr. Allen could tell you that they may show up in some of the Anacoco prairies or some of the inland prairies. I've just never seen them. So that's a real hard thing. A lot of milkweeds are hard to grow here. They're very few and far between because they're at the very end of their, distribution, and they're at the coast, and so they kind of peter out, with the exception of the coastal one, the red wetland one. I can't remember its name either. But that's the name of that plant. Yes.
Okay. We got a question about battling torpedo grass. Would your advice be the same as for Kogan grass?
No, I really, I think as far as the herbicide goes, I think that's the only way to deal with it. Other than Dr. Allen has said in the past, and I haven't seen this happen. I haven't had the chance to try to deal with it like that. But he says that he has seen torpedo get moved out by prairie. So I've not seen very much that has been able to eliminate torpedo grass. And so and typically where torpedo grass is, it's in a it's in a wet area when it's most happy. But I do know that in Louisiana, in New Orleans, people get that from field soil that they purchase, particularly in Batcher sand and so forth. But anyway, yeah. Did I answer the question? Yeah, I think again, it would be more like the Kogon grass. Those 6 or 7 that I listed are, again, think twice about how you want to deal with that, or just experiment, see what happens. And I would highly recommend doing both. try one or the other or both. And I always like to try 2 different things to see which one works better. And so maybe that's an approach.
Okay, Mark, we have 5 minutes left.
Okay.
So we have any more questions?
I think we have probably 1 or 2 more. One is, what is the ethic about seed collection on any of these prairies that you showed?
For common people, Mark, for common people, not for, professionals like you, but
Right.
for us.
Right. Well, so So the way that you might say consider creating a list, and I didn't talk about how to create a list, but basically, if you go to the paper Cajun Prairie Vascular Flora, you'll find every plant that existed in the prairies that they documented. However, there are about 100 species that I generally am working with. And, you know, in wetland prairies that I've worked with, as much as 180 species. A lot of those, many of those were grasses or grass-like plants. But a good list is one that I can give you. I can share a list with you that is one of my seed lists, let's say from last year. You can go to the University of Louisiana Lafayette has an ecology center, and they have a list of species of seed that they sell. And that's a good list to work with. It's roughly 50, 60, 70, something like that species. Yeah, so those are two. If you need a list, contact me. And then you would then be hopefully involved with somebody who can help you identify these plants. A good way to find out is to go to a Cajun Prairie meeting. And that's what people do there. They find out a lot about prairie plants and which ones are which, and everything else you can ask question-wise. There are a lot of knowledgeable people there. But basically, you're just, you know, I have a friend in Florida who has a business. He does the same thing. He just goes out and collects seed, put it in another place. He got a job early on when he was a young guy with Ernst Seed, and Mr. Ernst set him up with a couple of paper bags and put him by a ditch and said, "I'll see you at 3 o'clock, you know, just pick these seeds." And so he thought he was going to be on a tractor all day or something. So you basically just, you know, collect seed. And when I say I created a garden with a handful of seed, I can tell you that is actually true. You know, the 400-acre garden you saw the pictures of there, they use 2 pounds per acre of seed, and that's bulk seed. So that's maybe 1.5 pounds of cleaned seed. I can't think of the term now, but
Okay, so we don't want everyone to go out and collect all the seeds, because we need to make sure that they stay in the seed bank where they are. So we want them to just collect a little bit. Don't go on private property. Be careful on side the roads for sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so Dr. Allen says that any prairie seed that falls in an established prairie goes to waste, because year after year that seed will fall, and year after year it won't germinate because of the competition, generally speaking. And so to use the seed from these prairies is going to do very little. However, you know, there is an ethical thing. Yes, if there's a particular plant that you know you're concerned about, you don't want to collect all of the seed. You want to collect a little bit of the seed. I would think that would be true, you know, even in say the Cajun Prairie site, or in a restoration or someone's remnant. You know,
Mark, they might kick us off the meeting.
Okay.
It's 8 o'clock, so I want to make sure that we don't just abruptly end.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Marc Pastorek. You had a lot of interest in this meeting. I know that we started a little slow, but a lot of people were here and stayed on the call, and appreciate your time and your effort. And if anyone has any questions, they can go ahead and email you, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. If you all are okay, we can continue listening to Mark, and then just let him shut us out. I don't know how this works, but I have a question about Bahia. So I burned, and it looked like the Bahia came back worse.
Well,
So is there a
Bahia-
time I should burn
Yeah.
for Bahia?
Well, I think if you just burn the Bahia, it's going to be happy. But if you disc and till that Bahia and put seed down and then burn, then you'll see the Bahia go. I'll give you an example. At my place in Mississippi, I had it was basically a Bahia field, and that field became prairie, except where I mowed my paths, my fire lines. And today, where I mow once or twice a year, that's all. It's Bahia grass. And it
Okay.
doesn't go into the prairie, and the prairie doesn't go into the Bahia grass. So actually, Bahia is really good in one way, because when you till Bahia, you put your seed out, the Bahia is going to come back, but the fire is going to take care of the Bahia. I guarantee it.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all very much. I can't really, I don't know how to tell who's still on the call. Let's see. We still have lots of people on the call. Any more questions?
We had one more.
Cool.
Okay.
Have you had any issues with feral hogs?
Yeah. Yeah. On the, especially near water areas, I've had hogs come on my property just one time and did a lot of damage in one little spot, but I'm not, I'm 500 yards from a creek. But yeah, hogs are a terrible concern, and they can just tear up an area overnight. So yeah, that's not something that is easily dealt with, as you probably know. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we're done with our meeting. Again, thank you, Mark. We've had all the questions answered. And good night to everyone. And thank you for joining.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate your patience. Take care.
Good
Bye.
night.